Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're recapping this week in cannabis news from April 26th to May 2nd. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, make sure you subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with so that you can get familiar with the industry and some of the top companies. And that way you can develop your own understanding and get ready to take advantage in your own way when you are ready. Now, we're going to start off with a Bloomberg article. When will U.S. pot stocks catch fire? Well, there appears to be a lot of positive narrative in the media towards cannabis over the ending of last week and this past weekend. So we're going to roll through what we've seen and try to highlight some of the big things. Now, recent incremental progress on the cannabis front points to a larger momentum on the horizon, a comprehensive cannabis reform bill. We've heard all about this, but this is sort of where we've been led to based on actual legislative change. It's an effort led by Democratic Senators Chuck Schumer, Ron Wyden, and Cory Booker. Lest this be considered a partisan endeavor, though, Americans for Prosperity, a conservative political advocacy group founded by the Koch brothers, notably just endorsed the legalization of cannabis. Plus, 91% of Americans say pot should be legal in some form, including large numbers of Republicans, according to the Pew Research Center. So clearly, people's views on cannabis are changing, which is a very big positive for us. Now, to understand, it's important to be aware of the peculiarities of investing in cannabis companies. The biggest names that carry U.S. stock tickers are actually Canadian businesses: Aphria, Canopy Growth Corp, and Tilray Inc., to name a few. Their American counterparts, such as Curaleaf Holdings, Green Thumb Industries, and Trulieve Cannabis Corp., are relegated to less liquid Canadian exchanges or over-the-counter trading because pot is still illegal at the U.S. federal level, and listing standards maintained by the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ prevent their inclusion on these platforms. Most of this we already know, but good to recap. This gives the Canadian operators a big advantage in capturing investors' zeal for the lucrative growth opportunities afforded by pot, as evidenced by their steeper valuations. And if we take a look, remember there was an article from the Wall Street Journal a while back that I referenced showing that MSOs were trading at a price to sales multiple of 7, where Canadian companies, LPs, were trading at a price to sales multiple of upwards to 15 to 20. Clearly, there was some growth there. Now, this is just another iteration of that. Federal discount. Canadian cannabis companies that trade on U.S. exchanges are valued at an average of 10 times sales compared to 5 times sales of the U.S. multi-state operators. Now, obviously, Safe Banking Act is expected to be tied into that comprehensive bill. But instead of passing SAFE in a vacuum, it's more likely that key parts end up in the bills of bills encompassing broader cannabis reform that Schumer is helping to draft, which could help it win Republican support, Pablo Zuanic, an analyst for Cantor Fitzgerald, wrote in a note to clients. The plan could also include measures to expunge low-level cannabis infractions from people's records and reinvest cannabis tax money back into the communities of need, as it should be in order to correct many of the past wrongs that the war on drugs has created and has added to over time. But so this seems to be the first bit of awareness that we got on April 28th, which was nice. Now, Todd Harrison, again, one of the sources that I follow, he is a former trader on Wall Street, now trades for himself, runs his own ETF and investment firm. He tweeted on April 30th, so him saying this, not me, but Phase 2 of the 2021 U.S. cannabis rally has begun. Here for it. We will see how true this is. Well, obviously, we're just going to have to wait for time to play it out. But what's funny is he puts down here, the 420 low is our reference point. Seriously. Now, I'm not a I'm not a trader. I don't know much about charts, but obviously, he has some conviction based on his life experience and his past as a trader to call this. Now, it's comical, it's timing. So we'll just have to see how this statement plays out in time. But on top of that, I wanted to highlight this article from Barron's that came out, and Barron's is a well-respected investment firm in the U.S., and for them to just paste this on the cover, made in America, as the U.S. rapidly loosens its cannabis laws, domestic producers have an edge over their better-known Canadian rivals. We pick the winning stocks. It's almost as if some of the powers behind the media are orchestrating that, hey, this is phase 2 of the rally. It almost seems that way. So I just want to point this out. But I do respect this tweet from Andrew Regezi, founder, Strategy Lab, investor advisor, because this is just how I've always viewed it. And I've been trying to share this again long term with all of you. It's the trade of a lifetime. Shocking that people chase tech and crypto in light of the economics of this industry. Imagine if your great-grandparents had gone long spirits circa 1933. Well, this is the sound of opportunity knocking, my friends. Now, this article is available online. However, it has a paywall, so you have to subscribe or sign in order to read it. However, I was able to find someone copy and paste it, and in that sense, I've made it into a Google Doc that you'll be able to grab below if you want to read it. Now, I'm not going to spend time going through this whole article, but basically what it does is it highlights the top 4 U.S. multi-state operators that I've been talking about for a very long time: Curaleaf, GTI, Trulieve, and Cresco Labs. And it talks about why they're different from the Canadian operators. And basically the entire article just goes through a deep dive into Curaleaf, what they've been up to, how it's been tough for them. Then we've got Green Thumb, and I've highlighted most of their, not all of them, I didn't necessarily go through to looking specifically, but Trulieve, you can see where they start talking about Trulieve, and then Cresco Labs. They mention a good spiel about them there. And then the industry's mid-tier ranks include Columbia Care, Harvest Health and Recreation, Air Wellness, and TerraSend. And then obviously, to summarize this, the easiest way to get exposure is the Advisor Shares Pure U.S. Cannabis ETF MSOS, which is the best ETF that actually invests in U.S. multi-state operators as opposed to biopharma or companies in the cannabis space, but not actually selling like MSOs are. So on top of that, Barron's is apparently getting into all of the networks, even on Fox News. So we're going to hear Ben Kovler, CEO of Green Thumb, basically just explain why this industry is so much potential going forward.
This is not your father's Barron's. Our cover story this week, pot stocks. In April, the House passed a bill allowing the marijuana industry to use the federally regulated bank system. And with governments desperate for tax revenue since the pandemic, more states are looking toward legalization. Green Thumb Industries founder, CEO, and chairman Ben Kovler joins us now. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the roundtable.
Thanks for having me.
You come from a proud legacy of entrepreneurs in barely legal businesses. Your great-grandfather was an investor in the Jim Beam distillery as we emerged from Prohibition. What are the odds that the Senate will pass this bill to make it easier for companies like yours to use banking services?
Sure. I mean, we think safety for the SAFE Act makes sense, but you mentioned past generations, and we've said it before, and I think we'll say it several times, but history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And we've seen this movie before. What we're living as Americans in cannabis is really Prohibition 2.0. And we see such an unbelievable growth ahead, and we're really excited about where we sit.
So the banking issues are the first step. I know it's very difficult for people in your industry to do things as simple as get money to the bank or take loans or issue shares on the market, which you can't yet do. But after that step, what are the odds of federal legalization?
Well, it's important. I mean, you said take money to the bank, get loans, and various things. So the MSOs, of which we are one of them, are able to do all of those things. It's just more complicated. We talk about the hurdle of execution, and I would say that's a big differentiator for Green Thumb. But is getting money to the bank, is operating with high-quality U.S. banking institutions. These are not money center banks, but these are local and regional banks that are filing SARS reports and doing it legally. So employees are paid through direct deposit, cash goes to the bank, but simple things like credit card and various 401k and insurance are cumbersome or impossible.
Gotcha. So I want to ask you about the total addressable market for a company like yours. By our estimate, it looks like it's about $100 billion when you include illicit and legal sales. First of all, do you agree with that? And if so, I think that looks like a pretty good runway for growth. But what if we don't take these steps to make banking easier, to get federal legalization? Can you still operate?
And I love this answer. I mean, you're just going to listen to him all the way through, answer this in the perfect way, but it doesn't matter. They're still just going to crush and operate. So I think it was the CEO of TerraSend who said this. Well, it's a good point. You can pay me now, or you can pay me a lot more later. That's sort of the way you want to view this industry.
100%. I mean, Green Thumb operates positive net income per gap. We're compliant with the SEC and registered, even with 280E, even with state rules and federal rules in conflict. This is a classic American tale here. So we are able to execute and go ahead and do that, even under the current system. In terms of the size of the market, you bring up $100 billion. I mean, let's look at that, and we can look at it in several different ways. The way we would look at it, top down, bottom up, crisscross it, and make sure we understand the number. So take a state like Colorado, in its 6th year of legalization last year, put up a number of $2.1 billion. That was 25% growth over the prior year in a state with about 6 million people. So if you extrapolate that up to the U.S. based on size, you get a number around 100 billion. It gives us a lot of confidence. We've been using the number 80 billion, but either way, that's going to make the U.S. cannabis industry bigger, larger in size than U.S. spirits.
Wow.
It's going to make the U.S. cannabis industry larger than U.S. wine. And the last thing I would say is your question was, which I think is a good one, which is total addressable market, the TAM. And I think one of the lenses by which we can look at, and especially cannabis is about looking at things a little bit differently, we prefer to think about something like the total addressable problem. Not the market, but the problem. How many people don't sleep so well? Or how many people would prefer to sleep better? How many people would prefer, less anxiety or less pain or no hangover? And we think the consumer is pretty wide, pretty broad across the United States. And that makes us think that 100 is probably conservative. It's certainly not too high. But at the same time, it doesn't matter much for us. We're really head down focused inside the business, state to state. This is a state to state market at this point. And there's just huge runway for growth. So we think 100 is a decent number. We're using a number of 80. But if I had to bet, I would take a bigger number in a decade from now.
Gotcha.
And so I hope that helps reiterate how the whole federal talk going on does not impede or hinder the growth that is happening in legal states, state by state, which these companies are focusing on right now. So it's easy to think that once legalization happens, Canadian companies are coming in. I don't think that's going to happen. Not necessarily. Like, these American companies, why would they want Canadian companies to come in and buy them? They're better at what the Canadian companies are doing in their own territory. They're just not getting the attention they deserve. Now, you gotta love Ben Kovler for stealing the show, but now the interviewer is going to send it over to some of the other members to talk about some of the other companies mentioned. So
I want to do a quick lightning round with some of the other stories that we've got some of the other stocks we've got in our cover story. Carlton, I'll start with you. You're looking at Curaleaf.
Yeah, so Curaleaf is one where over a $9 billion market cap, still trading over the counter because of some of the regulations that you guys mentioned earlier. 105 stores in 23 states.
I could have told you that.
Ben, you're looking at Trulieve?
That's right. Trulieve has seen sales double in 2020, expecting another 6% growth in 2021. It's focused primarily in one state, but is looking out.
If you follow his eyes, he's just reading what someone told him to write.
We're now the one hitch is that the stock has gone up from $10 to $40 over the past year, and that is something to be a little cautious of.
So for investors who don't want to pick an individual stock, Beverly, as the person who runs the fund coverage of Barron's, tell us about an ETF that they can buy.
Well, there are 7 pot ETFs. The largest and oldest is the 1.7 billion ETF MG Alternative Harvest. It's a global fund and it's got a 5-year track record.
Get that. It's a global fund, 5-year track record. But if you want to invest in U.S. cannabis, MJ ETF is not the best one, because although it does have Grow Generation, which is sort of like the Home Depot of cannabis, giving you the supplies that you need, or GW Pharma, which is a UK-based company but does sell a prescription CBD-based drug in the US. You've got Afria, Tilray, Canopy, Kronos, Altria, Vector, Hexo. So she's recommending the ETF that does not actually invest in US cannabis.
All of the others are less than 2 years old. But as more stocks get listed in the U.S. and once there's federal legalization especially, prepare yourself. You're going to have a lot of ETFs to choose from. They're going to be more transparent and a lot cheaper too.
Now, without a doubt, I don't know how this is going to perform MJ or not, but it could likely also see an increase because it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, like the Canadian LPs are allowed to, giving them the volume and the access to the U.S. capital that the MSOs are not in. But again, if you're looking for a specific ETF that invests in these U.S. MSOs, that is the pure, let me just find the name for you, just so that I get it right and don't butcher it, the Advisor Shares Pure U.S. Cannabis ETF. And that just goes to show the holdings are Green Thumb, Trulieve, Curaleaf, Cresco, Air Wellness, TerraSen, Columbia Care, Grow Generation, Jushi, Innovative Industrial. If you wanted to see them all, you could download that here, but just thought that was worth pointing out. Now, on top of that, Todd Harrison did show some screenshots from some investment firms. So Bank of America, interestingly enough, they're relaunching on cannabis with a positive outlook on the Canadian LPs. We're relaunching coverage of Canadian cannabis licensed producers with a positive view as we anticipate progress in the U.S. towards federal legalization. See our initiations on Aurora, Canopy, Kronos, and Tilray. I guess Aphria becomes Tilray. Silly of me to think that. We expect share performance to correlate with the pace and scope of global cannabis legalization, especially in the U.S. We view Canada as a test market where companies can develop best practices. Long-term, the best performing cannabis stock will be those that can grow profitably globally, including the U.S. Now, and I just find that hilarious because this is Bank of America, one of the biggest U.S. banks, but they don't seem to have much faith in the U.S. companies or seem to have much knowledge in them, and thinking that it's going to be easy again for Canadian LPs to just come in and buy U.S. operators that are doing better than they are. Obviously, money talks at the end of the day, so we don't know, but I find that very interesting that they pointed out, and they're focusing so much on globally when the global market is tiny and all the money is being made in the U.S. Milestones along the path to U.S. legalizations will impact shares, leading to volatility. From November 2020 to early February 2021, cannabis enterprise value to second forward year sales multiples expanded 16 multiple turns. We attribute this to investor enthusiasm around the U.S. election. Since then, multiples have contracted to only 5 turns above November 2020 levels. We think investors have realized U.S. legalization will take longer than it hoped. Yes, for opportunities investing in Canadian LPs, but this has nothing to do, just says nothing about the real opportunity, which I also find hilarious to point this out, that this is from Canaccord Genuity, which is a Canadian investment firm. So we have the U.S. investment firms talking about Canadian cannabis companies and hyping them up, while we have the Canadian investment firms hyping up the U.S. ones because they're the ones that underwrite it. They're the ones that actually potentially make money because they're helping them uplist and they're benefiting from this. But let's see what Canaccord Genuity has to say. Many MSO names featured in this report appear poised to test important resistance near their 50-day moving averages. A multi-day close above this key technical level would open the door for a retest of the February highs and should be coincident with a broader risk-on rally through May. We view the U.S. MSO space as a good barometer for broader risk-on appetite. The names in this report are attempting to stabilize after an intermediate term 1 to 2 month corrective phase from the February highs. We would limit any risk on new positions near the daily support levels we've highlighted. We review the quantitative technical profiles of Air Wellness, Cresco Labs, Curaleaf Holdings, Green Thumb Industries, Harvest Health and Recreation, Trulieve Cannabis, and VIREO Holdings. Our overall ranking from a quantitative technical perspective is GTI, followed by Trulieve and Cresco Labs. So a few different things here. Obviously, what's true? It's hard to tell because everyone is saying everything that's different, but I focus on the fundamentals, and that, on the ground, the U.S. is where the money's being made, and that is why I do believe long-term the U.S. MSOs will benefit the most. Now, unfortunately, I missed this article limit, so I got to pull it up on Firefox, but no decision yet whether to link cannabis banking bill to other priorities, Brown says. This is Sherrod Brown, the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, but he did rephrase what he had previously said before. Senate Banking Chairman also says not set on tying bill to drug sentencing changes. And before, he was not going to allow SAFE to pass unless it came with some reform that included expunging past records and whatnot. Now, he has since stepped back from that statement, which is big, but obviously we don't know what influenced him since he's gotten his role and spent more time in there, but let me just read through what it says. Brown, who as chairman of the Banking Committee has jurisdiction over the House-passed bill, said it was unclear if it would be folded into the larger bill that Schumer has talked about. There's interest certainly from both parties. There's interest in sentencing reform as part of it. There's some interest in decriminalization generally, not legalization, Brown said Tuesday after the Senate vote. So just a lot of sort of fluff response. Mind you, this is the big takeaway. Brown asked if he still favored linking the banking bill with the easing of drug sentencing laws he blamed for disproportionately affecting minorities, as he proposed earlier in this year, appears to signal some flexibility. I'm pretty open to it. It's not something I've done a lot of work on yet. I know there's committee interest on both sides, he said. So, interestingly enough, he has changed his stance. And this is just an article on the same thing. Key Senate chair shifts stance on tying cannabis banking bills to sentencing reform. Now, I just wanted to highlight it in the from the different articles so we get two different perspectives. when it comes to the fate of cannabis banking legislation in the Senate, there are more questions than answers at this stage, with the chairman of a key committee walking back his insistence that the bill had to be tied to sentencing reform. Nonetheless, the senator is saying he's still in talks with leadership about incorporating it into a broader cannabis decriminalization proposal. So he's not out of the woods in doing that completely. We will hope to include things that deal with banking and finance in the legislation measure, Schumer said. Brown, for his part, has made it clear that he's not eager to move SAFE, citing that reservations about certain provisions. I think we need to look at a number of things, he said in an earlier interview, adding, I will look at this seriously, but we're not ready to move on it. One thing the chairman previously said he wanted to do was tie cannabis banking to some sort of sentencing reform. That's fine, by Representative Earl Perlmutter, sponsor of the House version of the Safe Banking Act, who said he's fine with making it a bigger bill, but it now seems that Brown is open to dropping that condition completely. So this is the new development. I'm pretty open on it. It's not something I've done a lot of work on yet, he said last week. I know that there's committee interest on both sides, so maybe he'll start, but this is good that he's changed his stance, from one that's static to more dynamic in working with the new information that he's learning. As it stands, the banking legislation has 34 co-sponsors in the Senate, plus sponsor Jeff Merkley, which means more than a third of the chamber is already formally signed on. So that is positive for SAFE, at least, just based on the last few weeks of lull and lack of news we've gotten. Next, bipartisan lawmakers want federal protections for cannabis states in next spending bill. Yes, could this be the safe harbor language that we've been waiting on? A bipartisan coalition of dozens of congressional lawmakers on Thursday sent a letter urging leaders of a key committee to include provisions protecting all state, territory, and tribal cannabis programs from federal interference in upcoming annual spending legislation when it is introduced. So the sign-on letter led by the Congressional Cannabis Caucus notes the growing number of states that have legalized cannabis for medical and recreational purposes and argues that the Department of Justice should be barred from enforcing prohibition against citizens who comply with those local policies. It's basically saying that citizens who are listening to their state's laws should be heard first and respected first, as opposed to the federal government abusing its power and stepping into whatever it feels like doing so. Most of these legalization laws were decided by ballot initiatives, the people, lawmakers says. We believe that the federal government should not interfere with these programs and the will of the citizens of these states, which I completely agree with as well. To that end, the group is asking leadership in a powerful House Appropriations Subcommittee to include a rider in the base bill of forthcoming spending legislation that would prevent the Justice Department from using its funds to intervene in legal adult use cannabis markets. They also said that an existing amendment to protect medical cannabis states should be renewed, as it has annually since 2014. And so this is what the language includes. Unlike the language of past year's amendments, the provisions the House legislators are requesting this time do not explicitly list the states and territories with medical and recreational cannabis laws on the books that would benefit from the protection. Instead, here's the simpler language that legislators want to see incorporated into the appropriations language. None of the funds made available by this act to the Department of Justice may be used with respect to any of the states, the District of Columbia, or U.S. territories to prevent any of them from implementing their own laws to authorize the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of cannabis. And this is big because what this tells me is that they're actually putting it in writing that any new money you receive from us cannot be used unconstitutionally and against the laws of the states just because the federal government deems that it can. And so in that sense, this is a big step. It might not be the safe harbor language that we need because this just refers to any new money from the act as opposed to old money from the past, but still it's a step in the right direction. None of the funds made available in this act to the Department of Justice may be used to enforce federal prohibitions involving the use, distribution, possess, or cultivation of cannabis for medical purposes that are permitted by the laws of the state, the District of Columbia, or U.S. territory where the act was committed, or to prevent states, the District of Columbia, or U.S. territories from implementing their own laws that permit the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of cannabis for medical purposes. And so what are the chances this can actually pass? Well, if the requested language is adopted, it stands to reason that it will make it through the House as part of the large-scale funding legislation. But what makes 2021 different is that the Democrats have the new majority in the Senate, meaning the more comprehensive provision covering states with recreational laws has a greater chance of being incorporated into the final package that's delivered to the president. So on top of that, we do have a bit of news from Schumer's rally yesterday, the May 1st cannabis rally in New York, and Schumer apparently slammed bigoted cannabis laws at the rally, saying his federal bill will legalize the right way. Now, I know a lot of people want action, and I do believe that is coming, but what we have here is still the Senate Majority Leader, the most powerful person in the Senate, talking about the outdated, archaic laws that are still in place and how he is coming up with a solution that is going to help correct that wrong. And again, this is big. So to just overlook that based on the fact that you want to make money is just, obviously might take you on an emotional roller coaster, but at the same time, this is what we want out of the leader and out of the person who has the ability to do this. So just a bit of a takeaway from this, Schumer reminded the audience that he pushed state lawmakers and Governor Cuomo to support a state legalization law with strong racial equity provisions, such as automatic expungement of past cannabis convictions and priority licensing for people most affected by the war on drugs. Federal legalization, he says, needs to include similar provisions. We've got to do it in the right way, the majority leader said of nationwide legalization. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in communities of color and to provide opportunities for folks who have been hit hard by prohibition. Right now, somewhere in the city, hopeful entrepreneurs are gathering together, thinking up a future cannabis business that'll provide jobs for New Yorkers and tax dollars to harmed communities, Schumer said. You should be doing that too if you live in a state where cannabis is legal, because clearly this isn't going anywhere and the acceptance is only going to increase in the future. And so a lot of this article just highlighted intentions, and yes, it's just talk, it's not action, but still, when you put your intentions out there, that's when you basically show your cards, and it's up to the people that you're speaking to hold you accountable if you do not follow up with actions that match those intentions over time. Now, on top of that, out of Montana, the recreational pot bill is headed to the governor's desk to sign as lawmakers passed HB 701 out of both chambers following more drama. Now, it's interesting because after a whirlwind 24 hours that saw the fate of the bill change dramatically on more than one occasion, the legislature has passed House Bill 701, landmark legislation that implements the recreational cannabis program that voters approved last year. So seems like there was a lot of back and forth to make changes, and in the end, those changes did not even end up passing, and they went with the initiatives that were on the ballot and voted on in November of last year. So a lot of work and talk for nothing, for the same outcome that the people wanted in the first place, which is actually great, I think. And the state House on Tuesday morning passed the bill as amended by the Senate on third reading 67-32, sending it to the governor's desk. Retail sales of recreational cannabis is slated to begin in January of 2022. So that is awesome. Welcome aboard, Montana. And it is now official out of the Longhorn State. Texas House votes to decriminalize cannabis and expand their medical cannabis system, which is good and bad. I mean, not to say bad, but it just decriminalizing and not setting up a legal system to regulate and tax sales keeps the black market alive. Mind you, it does obviously stop people from going to jail for possessing cannabis, which is great. But on top of this, expanding the medical cannabis program is really as much as we can ask for now, because it gives people living in Texas, again, a red state that has traditionally been opposed to cannabis, it allows more to qualify for medical cannabis for an alternative to opioids if they wish, or just an alternative to relieve their suffering that isn't addictive and works well. But this is a huge step as House representatives in Texas on Thursday approved bill to decriminalize cannabis possession and significantly expands the state's medical cannabis program. These are the latest developments to come amid a week that has seen multiple pieces of reform legislation advance in the chamber, including separate measures to reduce penalties for possessing cannabis concentrates, and requires the state to study the therapeutic potential of psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA. Very nice. The bill to decriminalize possession of up to 1 ounce of cannabis, making the offense a Class C misdemeanor that does not come with the threat of jail time, was approved on second reading in the chamber by a voice vote. Still not ideal. But regardless, the final vote did take place. The passage of the House did come with a victory of 134-12, sending it to the Senate. But this is the best part of that bill. It would add cancer, chronic pain, and post-traumatic stress disorder as conditions that could qualify people for the state's limited medical cannabis program. And while advocates appreciate that Texas lawmakers are moving to expand the state's existing program, they feel it can be improved upon and hope to see amendments to give more patients access to cannabis when it arrives in the Senate. Because when you think of Florida, we're a state with 21 million people, where now there's 544,000 medical patients, and Texas only has like 2,000 or 3,000. Just wait until that program can expand. Going to be big things to come out of the Lone Star State. On to U.S. MSOs, Green Thumb Industries setting a precedent, announcing a senior debt financing round worth U.S. $217 million. Now, obviously, this does mean short-term dilution worth about $217 million into Green Thumb's addressable market cap right now in the short term, but long-term, I think this signifies something a lot bigger, showing that Green Thumb has secured additional funding at an industry-leading interest rate of 7%, whereas traditionally, U.S. MSOs could not get any sort of funding or financing at an interest rate less than 12%. So this is a big drop from 12 down to 7. It tells us that the cost of capital is going down for companies in this industry, and it tells us that investors are more confident to lend out their money at lower rates based on the fundamentals and what they're seeing actually unfold on the ground. And when you compare this to like an individual perspective, think of mortgage rates. You're getting a large sum of money, and because the sum is so large, you want an interest rate that's as low as possible. 3%, 2%, the lower the better. Because if there's any sort of jump in the interest rate, if it's too big, you cannot afford your interest payment because of the sum is so big, right, in general. So this just points to how that 7% interest rate makes such a difference to previously announced 12% interest rates and just what this industry has been used to. So today, Green Thumb announces that it has closed this $217 million senior non-brokered private placement, meaning it's coming from individual investors and not a brokerage firm or an institution, a financial firm. Financing through issuance of senior secured notes. The company intends to use the proceeds to retire the company's existing US $105 million senior secured debt due May 2023 and for general working capital purposes as well as various growth initiatives. History has taught us that the winners in new industries are those with the lowest cost of capital and the strongest balance sheets, said GTI founder and CEO Ben Kovler. Our successful non-brokered offering, Gross Net, was supported by members of the management team in addition to a diverse group of new and existing high-quality institutional investors. So it seems like people within the team that have cash that are willing to put up their capital because they love where this is going and they want to own a larger percentage of it. But on top of that, it's a group of new and existing high-quality institutional investors who share in their strategic vision and plan to capitalize on the opportunities ahead. This financing represents industry-leading cost of capital in the legal cannabis industry and strengthens our balance sheet. This new capital will allow us to focus on shareholder value creation through strategic investments to scale our existing operations in addition to accretive mergers and acquisition opportunities. The notes have a maturity date of April 30th, 2024 and will bear interest from the dates of issue at 7% per annum, payable quarterly with an option at the discretion of the company to extend an additional 12 months. The financing permits the company to borrow an additional US $33 million over the next 12 months. And the purchaser of the notes also received an aggregate of over 1 million warrants. Each warrant is exercisable to purchase one subordinate voting share of GTI at an exercise price of US $30.68 per share for a period of 60 months of the date issue, which seems fairly accurate if we just consider Green Thumb's price as of close on Friday, $32 a share USD. So what this tells us, though, is that investors are willing to get in now, and they still think that they're getting a great deal in the long run. So I think that's worth pointing out. On to Trulieve, the dominant MSO in Florida. They have announced that they won a Stevie Award in 2021 American Business Awards for the achievement in growth. The awards recognize businesses that have excelled in further developing their operations through various avenues, such as mergers and acquisitions and corporate expansion. After an unprecedented 2020, we are proud to be recognized for our growth and expansion into new markets, said Kim Rivers, CEO of Trulieve. We look forward to building on this momentum as we drive further expansion across North America, including operations in Pennsylvania and the opening of Massachusetts in our Northeast hub, bringing our high-quality cannabis products and unmatched customer service to more patients and consumers. I think on top of that, they are getting into Virginia and West Virginia as well. So nice to be, accredited with some sort of form of an award when you are just doing what you're naturally doing. Trulieve is focusing on expanding their business in key states. That is their goal. These awards just happen to follow when you do that well. And on top of the Office of Medical Cannabis Use basically highlighting what's happened in Florida in the past week, we end that off on April 30th. We can see that they've added about 4,000 qualified medical patients. They have not added any physicians since the recent since last week's publication. But on top of this, we can see again that Trulieve, the company in Florida, has again sold over a ton of cannabis, literally a cubic ton of cannabis, which is amazing. Behind that, you've got Certura Wellness, Curaleaf, Liberty Health Sciences, AltMed Florida, Fluent, Vitacan, Grow Healthy, Columbia Care Florida, MedMen One Plant, which is owned by Cresco Labs, Harvest Health, GTI, Green Thumb Industries in here as well. So we can see the companies that are established in Florida, what they're selling in milligrams worth of THC, what they're selling in milligrams of CBD, and what they're selling in ounces of smokable flower. So growth is still growing strong in Florida. Again, a market that is only open to medicinal, not recreational yet, but hopefully in 2022 that will change. Next up, Curaleaf is very happy to announce their first Curaleaf branded adult use store opens in Maine, making it their 106th retail location across the US so far. Now that's really all I wanted to highlight out of this article, as Curaleaf continues week after week to keep opening stores. But let me propose this question to you, okay? Would you rather, with all that you know, invest in a fast-growing brand with real estate locations growing across the nation, and with a product that a lot of consumers likely don't even know that it benefits them yet, and are likely over time to adopt it? Now, let me just ask you this. Would you rather invest in that brand when they open their 100th store? Or would you rather invest in that brand after they open their 1,000th store? Or would you rather invest in that brand after they've opened their 10,000th store? Now, which brand am I talking about? Am I talking about Curaleaf or am I talking about McDonald's? It depends. But I want to leave that there for you to think. Would you rather invest in a company or a brand after they've opened their 100th store, their 1,000th store, or their 10,000th store? Because there's always opportunity to invest in a brand. We just don't know if they're ever going to get to their 100th, their 1,000th, or their 10,000th. Just pointing that out. Next, Columbia Care brings scale to New York cannabis program through acquisition of one of the largest operating greenhouse sites on the East Coast. So they're happy to announce it has acquired a 34-acre cultivation site in eastern Long Island, New York, which will allow them to grow a lot of cannabis in the future. The company's first harvest and sales from this property for the state's medical cannabis program is expected in Q4 2021, pending regulatory approval. So although they have announced this purchase, they're not growing anything yet, and they wouldn't expect to be able to harvest anything until the end of 2021. But what does this do for Curaleaf or for Cresco? What does it do for Columbia Care? God damn it, in New York? As a company whose roots are in New York, it has been incredibly important that we build a scalable, vertically integrated operation in the state that not only delivers the very best quality and prices to our patients and partners today, but also ensures that we can continue to deliver on our mission to New Yorkers through future legal cannabis programs. This is a commitment to our patients, communities, regulators, elected officials, and social equity partners that we are here for the long term and intend to be the leaders who define cannabis in New York State, made in New York, by New Yorkers, for New Yorkers, said Nicholas Vita, CEO of Columbia Care. We are eager to see New York's regulated market emerge as one of the top global cannabis markets, with some market size estimates exceeding $5 billion by 2025 and more than 75,000 jobs created by 2027. We intend to continue to invest in opportunities that support this growth for all. Columbia Care will pay a total purchase price of $42.5 million, which includes12 million in cash and $27.5 million in Columbia Care stock. The initial payment of $30 million has been made, and the remaining $12.5 million in stock payment will follow in August 2021 upon completion of the second phase of the transaction. On top of that, VIREO Health expands ground cannabis flower in New York, offers largest selection of ground flower at any New York dispensary. Great news out of VIREO, announcing that the company's launched of the company's first line of ground medical flower in New York. The new line of ground flower will be expanded to 4 strains and is available at all 4 of the company's dispensaries in New York via home delivery. VIREO is excited to launch a full line of medical cannabis flower products for our patients in New York, as Chairman and CEO Kyle Kingsley said, Dr. Kyle Kingsley, should I emphasize. Allowing the sale of medical cannabis in its natural form, as dry flower, is the most effective way to reduce the cost of medical cannabis. By offering dry flower, we can increase patient accessibility, affordability, and greatly expand our product offerings. This will not only help existing medical cannabis patients, but it will also make the program more attractive to all New Yorkers. As this seems to be a thing in many states where they do not allow sale of dried flower, you have to buy them in a vape cartridge or in the form of concentrate and consume them that way. So the ground flower line will be sold in 3.5 gram or 7 gram jars and will be expanded to future indica, sativa, and hybrid strains. By September, VIREO expects to expand the ground flower line to include more than 20 different cannabis strains. Ground flower cannabis is now allowed by the New York Department of Health for medical cannabis patients to vaporize. Finally, and another MSO, GAGE Cannabis, announces the grand opening of Battle Creek Dispensary and adds another dispensary to retail portfolio. GAGE's 8th retail location is currently welcoming medical patients and will serve adult use customers in the coming weeks. Main reason I wanted to highlight this is that GAGE Cannabis, although a new cannabis company and they've recently IPO'd, and since their IPO their share price has dropped, but I wanted to point them out because they are one of the leading high-quality cannabis brands and operators in Michigan, which, as I've highlighted in past videos, is one of the fastest-growing states. So they announced with this headline that is the 8th Provisional Center in Michigan. So one way that you can try to get in on the Michigan cannabis market as it continues to expand with unprecedented growth and experience this growth, especially after sales topped 146 million in March alone, and GAGE is determined to continue expanding our retail presence in order to meet this growing demand. So this is definitely a company to keep an eye on if you want to take advantage of that growth in Michigan. Now, lastly, to round off, Marlboro makers Philip Morris keeps cannabis options open. Let's see what their views of the cannabis industry are right now and how they've changed over the past years. We are doing all this work and will determine one day what avenues to pursue, he said in an interview, but our priority is what we're doing with our smoke-free products, and that's where I would stay on cannabis. The comments hint at a possible shift for a company that has kept to the sidelines of the cannabis market, even as other cigarette companies have jumped in. Altria Group, which sells Marlboros in the US, announced an investment in 2018 in cannabis producer Cronos Group, Inc. Earlier this year, British American Tobacco took a stake in Organigram Holdings. Now, Philip Morris invested 5 years ago in an Israeli medical cannabis company, Seek Medical, but that wasn't tied directly to medical products. The small deal was intended to secure the exclusive global rights to technology for high-precision dosing for cannabis-free tobacco products and nicotine applications, Philip Morris spokesperson Corey Henry said. So that explains why they've invested in Cronos and why they've invested in Organigram, two Canadian LPs that are not making money, therefore without funding from a large tobacco giant would not be able to stay afloat in the very cash competitive markets that they're in. But for these big tobacco companies to invest in them to work on their technology, it's an easy way for them to learn about the cannabis industry while getting some skin in the game along the way. So if Philip Morris opts to pursue cannabis, it could be part of the company's Beyond Nicotine strategy, which involves adding botanicals to expand risk-reduced products with new flavors like cloves, star anise, and chamomile. Areas of opportunity could also include sleep aid, energy, or calm control, the company said at an investor day in February, and that is likely where we might see cannabis come into this. But at the same time, I just want to point this out that at the beginning, in 2018, when I started investing and I only cared about making money, I was all for big tobacco coming in and partnering with Canadian LPs. At the time, I thought it was because they would all go to the moon. Now I realize it's just an easy and cheap way for tobacco to get into cannabis and learn about the cannabis industry so that they can try to keep padding their fortunes over time and ride the cannabis wave. And, for myself, actually at this point, I'm completely against that. I do not think any US MSOs are going to want to partner with any tobacco because they understand that tobacco has made their fortunes by lying to the public, mostly about their own product, and then forcefully and paying for lobbyists to lie about, the truth about cannabis, keeping that illegal for so long. And so I just see this as a last-ditch effort for this industry, but ultimately positive sentiment towards cannabis because it means that this industry sees that they're dying out and that they need to innovate in order to stay alive, and cannabis is the way to go. So lastly, I want to present to you folks, this is from Newsfile Corp. The CSE, the Canadian Securities Exchange, prevents the Cannabis Investor Series, four special forums during the month of May that will focus on cannabis and investing. So I've not signed up for this yet, but I'm considering doing so. Episode 1 will cover investing in American cannabis on May 4th. Episode 2 is cannabis culture and capital markets on May 11th. Episode 3 is cannabis health and wellness on May 18th. And episode 4, the cannabis global economy on May 25th. Obviously, you do not need to watch this because just by watching my weekly videos, you're definitely getting caught up in educating yourself. But for me, I'm a proponent of education in all forms, and if it's something I'm interested in, I just want to soak it up, have it in the brain back here so that I can process it with what I know and use it to help make decisions going forward. So you can check this out, though. Here, the link will be below if you're interested. But that is it for this week in Cannabis News, everyone. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe below if you don't want to miss any more, and let me know what you think. Please leave some comments below. Do you think that we've hit bottom and that we're going to start seeing the trend head in the opposite direction? Or do you still think that cannabis is doomed just because the stock prices have been red for a little while? Let me know below. Let's have a discussion, but ultimately, I'm optimistic as ever, and I look forward to seeing what this week brings us and if the trend does change in that direction. So I want to wish you all a great weekend, folks. Have a great one, and I'll see you Wednesday for the midweek update.